right, what's up, everyone? Kevin Allen here from DFS Army. You guys know me as the Geek. And today we're taking a look at ownership leverage. This is something I've talked about pretty much throughout the year, throughout many years, but throughout the year on my podcast. And I promised a specific video breaking down the power of leveraging ownership in DFS, where I believe this is the single most important tool in our arsenal for becoming a profitable player. And it's probably the one theory, let's call it, that people get wrong the most. So I wanted to sort of show a visualization of how ownership projections work relative to player projections and why leveraging ownership is our most powerful tool. So I want to get started with a few different examples, but essentially all of the examples I'm going to do right now are coin flip. So the idea is the baseline presumption is 1,000 people enter a contest. Each puts in $1. So it's a $1 entry contest, 1,000 entrants. And there are two possible answers, yes or no, heads or tails. All right. It's not always going to be a 50-50 proposition, but in the case of our first example, it will be. It's a coin that is weighted equally when you flip it to be heads or tails, right? That's the basic assumption. And the second thing we're going to provide in this example is an ownership projection. So you as a user, as an entrant in this tournament, you get a choice. All right, heads or tails. Without knowing anything else, say, well, what are the odds of each event happening? 50-50. It's 50-50. It's going to be heads. 50-50. It's going to be tails. What is the correct answer? Well, you don't have enough information. But if we add in another piece of information, projected ownerships or ownerships in the contest, and we find out that 60% of the entrants in the contest are choosing heads, then we should always choose tails, and we will make money doing that. Well, how do you do it? Let's take a look. Right. So in our assumption, the coin, we do 10 coin flips. Half of the time it's going to be heads and half of the time it's going to be tails. You have to pick one for the entire 10. So you pick tails. Why are we picking tails? Because we know that the ownership projection for the contest show that heads will be chosen 60% of the time. So here are the results. For each time that the coin is flipped and we get heads 5 times, the people who picked heads would win back $1.67 on their $1 investment. That's because 60% of the entrants in the contest chose heads. So you're not even doubling your money. In the other 5 spins or flips, when the coin hits tails, the 40% of people that chose tails will get $2.50 for each flip. The net result will be, after 10 spins, the heads pickers had entered $10 into the contest. They got back $8.33 for a net loss of $1.67, whereas the tails pickers will end up having won back $12.50 less their investment equals $2.50. So right here is a really basic example showing why ownership leverage is actually more important than the projection itself, because the projections were correct here, but because more people chose heads, the tails pickers ended up winning money. And as a matter of fact, even if we add a situation where the coin flipped to heads one extra time, so we got 60% of the time the coin flipping to heads, all that happens at that point is a break even. So for the heads pickers, because it's 60% of them, you really had to have something crazy going on, like heads hitting not 50% of the time, not 60% of the time, but 70% of the time, in order to get enough leverage on heads to make up for the fact that these players chose they put their ownership on the higher owned situation. Okay, now let's switch this up a little bit, because you might be saying, well, 50-50 proposition. The takeaway for DFS from this is, if you have two players about the same price with similar projections, and one is going to be 30% owned, whereas the other one is only going to be 10% owned, Over time in DFS, you will make more money by going with the lower owned player, even if the higher owned player has a slightly higher projection or is slightly more likely to score better. It doesn't matter because over time, because we're in a tournament setting, the more profitable approach is to leverage ownership. And I'm going to show you in a more dramatic example up here what I mean, because this one really drives it home. Now, in the case of this scenario, the coin is weighted, and this is much more like a real world scenario. It's really, really hard to go against this, but you really should. In this scenario, the coin is weighted 70% heads, 30% tails. So this is a specialty coin where, and the field knows it. They are aware. They're aware that we are dealing with a coin flip contest, and this coin is weighted to hit heads 70% of the time and tails only 30% of the time. Okay? So you're going into this contest. You know this. Same scenario as before. 1,000 people entering $1 each in this contest. The winners all get paid out whatever's in the pool. The losers, nothing for each flip. So check this out. You pick heads because you're like, hey, it's 70% of the time it's going to hit heads, right? All right, let me pick heads. Well, 90%. So in our assumption here, 90% of the entrants in the contest pick heads because it's obvious that more often than not, it's going to fall on heads. So it's hard to do the opposite. Yeah, no, I'm taking heads. I know it. I'm smart. I'm taking heads, right? 90% of the entrants into the contest also pick heads because it's so obviously going to be the right play, right? It's the right play. Logically, why would I choose tails when it's 70% more likely to hit heads? But let's play this out in real time. So in the case of this scenario, the coin flip works exactly as weighted. 7 out of the 10 spins are heads, with only 3 hitting at tails. For the heads pickers, 90% of the field picks heads. When they win, they only get $1.11 back, so 1.11 back. Even though they won 7 times, their total net for this contest is minus $2.22. So essentially, they lost money. They were right, and they lost money anyway because so much ownership was on heads that when it did choose heads, they didn't make much money because everybody's sharing in the pot. But when it fell on tails, the tails pickers really feasted. And take a look at this. So in that same scenario, the 10% of people that chose tails, when it did finally fall on tails, they made $10, right, for each spin. So for the 3 occasions where it fell on tails, they made $10, $20, $30, less their investment 10. So the tails pickers in this scenario are up $20. They were only right 3 times out of 10. The heads pickers are down $2.22, and they were right 7 times out of 10. And wait, let me show you even more dramatic. So we know going into the contest that the coin was weighted 70% to fall on heads and 30% to fall on tails. But when reality struck, we actually got 8 rolls of heads and only 2 of tails. Only 2. So we still had 90% of the field picking heads because, hey, they were massively favored to have the coin fall on them. Of course, you should choose heads, right? Or maybe not. So how did it play out? The heads pickers win 8 times out of 10. But because so much of the field also piled on heads, they didn't make any money. There was no point, right? 8 times out of 10, even beating the odds, they still wind up down $1.11 after 10 spins because on the 2 times when it came to tails, they made 0, and that was enough to give back all of the profit from the 8 times it fell on heads. On the flip side, again, tails pickers, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. But when they finally do win, only two spins, or it spins. I keep saying spins. Only 2 flips of the coin hit tails, but each time they made $10. The first time they made all the money back from all the entries, and the second time was $10 in pure profit. So what does this illustrate? Well, It shows that even when a player is in a good position, and we're going to take it out to DFS. Hey, they look like the chalk for great reason. They're in a great spot tonight. They're going to smash. If a player is going to be 80 or 90% owned, you borderline cannot make money by playing them. Now, of course, DFS contests are not a zero-sum game, and that's just one player, and there are multiple players in every single contest and whatnot. But the key takeaway is leveraging ownership when you know what the ownerships are. One of the beautiful things we do at DFS Army is we project ownerships for just about every single contest. The takeaway is you must use the ownerships when crafting your DFS lineups, because when you're entering tournaments, ownership leverage itself is just as important or more important than the projection itself. So hopefully this helps you kind of change your game a little bit, reinforces some things that you already thought, but understanding the power of leveraging ownership is one of the keys to being a profitable daily fantasy sports player. And this game theory really translates across a lot of different contests and competitions. So keep it in mind, experiment with it all you want, but make sure that you are applying this knowledge in your DFS game. That's all I got for today, guys. Good luck, and we'll see you next time. Of course, if you're not signed up for DFS Army, come on in. We've got a chat. We're talking strategy. We're breaking everything down. Optimize projections, everything you need. Go check it out at dfsarmy.com. Promo code GEEK gets you 10% off. I will see you next time with more strategy content.